Hello, Jean-Paul, and thank you for being with us today, and thank you for being a voice of the mindful community. We know each other since many years. You've been to many of my courses and workshops, and I just wanted to ask you, how did you start your mindfulness journey?
Yeah, well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to share my experience to the community. Um, yeah, I first got in touch with mindfulness or mental training, I suppose, as it was at the time, back when I was a teenager. I had a small illness, which meant I was off school for a number of months. And my parents, who were also slightly in this field, got me a trainer. And funnily enough, at the time, it was very much like mental training, and that was my first exposure to meditation. Now, in reflection, it was pure mindfulness-based practices, but 25 years ago. So already from a young age as a teenager, I was quite open to these sorts of techniques because I saw how powerful they were and how much of a benefit they brought for me. Then moving forwards, I've always been quite involved in sport and quite competitive in sport all my life. And I did a lot of mental training surrounding sport over the last, call it 15 years. And I also found it very, very powerful. And anyway, so then as my life started to get a little more stressful, around about 7, 8 years ago, and I struggled a little bit. Actually, at the time, my girlfriend, Ulrika, suggested this mindfulness course that she found online, and that was you. And that was 7 years ago, and I've been a regular mindfulness meditation practicer since then.
Oh, great. So you already mentioned that mindfulness is quite popular and sometimes looks like a buzzword. And I wanted to ask you, actually, what are we talking about? What is this mindfulness word in your own words and from your own experience?
Yeah, so I suppose from my personal experience, mindfulness boils down to awareness. It's being aware of what's happening when it's happening. So often we're on this automatic pilot going through life and not really noticing what's happening. So what I've noticed, at least through my mindfulness practice, that I've become a lot more aware both of what happens externally, so what's happening around me, but also what's happening internally within my own head and my own thoughts. And that's really powerful because it just increases the richness of life, but also it gives you a little bit more understanding of yourself and the way you react to the inputs of the world. And nowadays with social media and all of this bombardment of inputs, it's really important that we have some sort of tool to control how we react, or at least be aware of how we react to things. And for me, this mindfulness practice that's one of the main things it gives to me, is this ability to be aware of how I'm reacting in any particular moment. And in that moment, I then have a choice. How do I react?
That's beautiful. So thank you for mentioning this very important aspect of the space between what happens to us and the way we choose to respond. And you already started to mention a couple of aspects that you notice inside yourself when you practice mindfulness. And I wanted to ask you, maybe you can develop a little bit why you practice. What are some of the benefits that you notice in your life?
Yeah, so say the main one I think I've already mentioned is just being aware of what's happening around me, but moreover what's happening in my own head. And I think it's this mental dialogue that we have constantly with each other, and we're our own worst enemy in many cases. And a lot of the time, at least before I began practicing mindfulness meditation in a more dedicated way, you're really just not aware of these things, and suddenly you feel angry or exhausted or emotionally burnt out, and you don't really understand where it came from. So one of the biggest things I've noticed, I've become a lot more aware of this internal chatter, and I have it's not always easy, but you have more choice in how you choose to react to that. So when I find that I'm really stressing myself out, I'm able to sort of, for a moment, step back and observe that like a third-party observer and sort of go, oh, this is interesting. Okay, this is just useless mental chatter that's not helping me. I choose then, okay, that's just thinking, or that's just feeling. And in a way, it's harder said than done, but let it go and move on. So that's one of the biggest things. I have a lot more control on the choices I make with how I react to the world and myself. But one of the funny side effects that I've found through, say, the last 7 years of quite regular practice is I've got a much, much more increased sense of compassion and understanding towards both myself and others. And I think that's a really positive thing, because I really see the world now from a slightly different angle, an angle of more understanding and compassion for other people. And that's a nice thing. So that's kind of what I've noticed, just as an indirect benefit that I'm experiencing through mindfulness practice.
Oh, that's beautiful. Such an important aspect. And you already started to talk about this regular practice and the importance of the regular practice. So just wanted to ask you, how do you cultivate mindfulness in your life? We all have busy lives. So
yeah, I think that, there's many ways. So like everyone, you have phases where life is busy and you practice less, and other times where you practice more. I try and have a daily practice where possible of 15 to 20 minutes where I simply make the time. I literally just get up 15 minutes earlier in the morning, and normally I wake up and do a few things first, so I'm a bit more awake, and then I sit and do my meditation practice for 15 to 20 minutes. I do a combination of practices, silent practices by myself. I use some apps as well to do some guided meditations, which I find quite useful. I use quite a balance. But I think also an important point is that that people also need to realize is that meditation or mindfulness practices aren't just sitting on a mat or on a chair and closing your eyes and thinking. It's also jogging. It's also playing a musical instrument. It's also going for a walk on a beautiful day and just being really taking in the surroundings and being aware. I think many people actually have a mindfulness sort of practice but aren't even aware of it. And again, sort of for me, coming from a sporting background, I always found that sport was a very good balancing tool for me for balancing my work life, so to speak. And sort of reflecting again now, for me, jogging is very much a form of mindful practice.
Thank you for sharing.
So my combination of mindful practices is I try and have a formal practice, a meditation in the morning, but I also count mindful practices as doing sports and going for a nice walk and things like that.
So important to mention also that it's not only meditation, but it can be also some other activities and some other ways in which we cultivate this sense of awareness and connection with ourselves. And I know that you are an entrepreneur, and I just wanted to ask you if you find that mindfulness helps you in your day-to-day business life, in the professional life.
Yeah, first, very clearly, absolutely. Having created a company and a brand from scratch, very naively, not knowing how much work that would be and how much of a stress and strain it would place on me emotionally and physically and everything. And I have to say, quite simply, these mindfulness practices were the difference between success and not success for me, because it is very challenging. And to be honest, I don't think you just need to be an entrepreneur. I think everyone has enough major stress in their lives nowadays that you need some form of tools. So I think, absolutely, in my professional life on a daily basis, especially when I'm dealing with challenging situations, again, just this ability to sort of say, okay, I'm aware of the fact that I'm now very stressed. What is that stress? What am I stressing out about? Just being a little bit more aware of the reasons of these feelings. And then it helps me, I think, react in a better way in a more appropriate way. So that's on a particular business relation, how I use mindfulness. Otherwise, simply, dealing with a difficult negotiation with a colleague in a challenging situation. Again, just the ability to, I suppose you'd boil it down to keep your cool, even though, in your mind you might be raging. You have the choice of how you react. And again, the mindfulness practice helps a lot for me there. And funnily enough, a final one is that, my business is in the sporting industry, and I deal a lot with, absolute elite professional athletes. And it's been quite interesting most recently to hear that the elite athletes, especially in the endurance type competitions, also have very much mindfulness-based practices to try and, again, help them in difficult situations where the body and the mind are at conflict, to keep going and still extract the maximum performance. So it's quite interesting to see how all of this mindfulness practice and of course for me, having, say, a reasonable amount of experience there now, to see how that's actually applying to directly to my business and the people I work with.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all these insights with us, and looking forward to see you around in our community.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ella.